It was January of 2023. I was sitting on my bed watching the second season of The Vow, produced by HBO. It was a docuseries about the cult NXIVM.
ESP NXIVM is a methodology that allows people to optimize their behavior. Our main belief is to have people experience more joy in their lives. Our commitment is our power. You stay. When conventional solutions don't work, maybe the unconventional way of thinking does.
I was looking around at all these people that just didn't seem joyful. I started to get concerned.
I kept thinking, well, at least I wasn't in a cult like that one.
There's a secret organization in NXIVM. They sign a lifetime vow of obedience, and they're branding girls.
And they're trying to recruit other women to do this.
Do you think the person who's being branded should be completely nude and sort of held to the table like a, sort of almost like a sacrifice?
The branding might force it.
Brainwashing, sex abuse, and even branding.
These are adult women making decisions. Back off.
She's young and she's alone.
And he wants her to be a slave.
The woman allegedly kept confined to a room is expected to be on the stand today.
What the?
I'd been out of the evangelical church for almost 10 years by this point, and a year and a half out of what I thought was the healing self-help world of coaches, law of attraction, conscious community, and sacred union. As I watched the Keith Raniere empire unravel, women branded, locked in rooms, told their pain was their path, I started mentally listing every group, teacher, or system I'd been part of in my 46 years. Over 20. That's how many I wrote down in my journal that day. Not one of them would technically be called a cult, but they all had the same blueprint. A leader with answers, a system that promises healing, and an unspoken truth. If it's not working, it's not the system, it's you. And that's when I realized patriarchy didn't disappear when I left the church. It just changed its outfit and its language. It swapped Bible verses for vision boards. Name it and claim it for align and manifest. Salvation for embodiment. But the core message was the same. You're broken, you need fixing, and somebody else has the key that you don't have. Today, there is one documentary after another about the self-help world and the cults that are popping up everywhere in it. Some of the people that actually work in helping to expose this call it the age of cults. And while nothing I was in, from the ecstatic dance community to the women's embodiment groups that I was part of, while none of those could actually be called cults, there was plenty of culty things going on in them. So today, we are actually going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the toxic underbelly of the self-help world and how it so easily masquerades itself as liberation while quietly reinforcing the same systems of control and domination that we thought we left from the church. Now, as I started to pull all of this material together from my 8.5 years inside these types of different communities within the self-help world, I had so much material, much more than I did for my 16 years within the church, that I've decided that I can't hit it all in just 1 or 2 episodes in this season. So I'm gonna save all the depth of what I was working on in those different episodes and just hit on a 25,000 foot vision today of how patriarchy weaves its way into the self-help world. I'll save the rest of that material for a different season. Right now it's slotted as season 3, so stay tuned to this channel to see what really happens. In that season, we're gonna dive into what I call the 6 false freedoms and the cult-like tactics that are infusing these communities in plain sight. But first, let's rewind and see what drew me in to these type of communities. Because just like the church at the beginning, nothing felt toxic. It felt magical. It felt like liberation. It felt like coming home to my soul, especially when I started to learn how to do movement medicine, which is my version of conscious dance. And like my experience within the church of someone handing me the rule book to life and who to be in this role as a woman, this felt like somebody handing a piece of my soul back that was missing, that I didn't even know was missing. So let's let me take you back to where it all began. If you watched my previous episode where I talked about showing up to this women's embodiment retreat, and the first night we started this eye-gazing experience, that's where my journey into the self-help world began. At that point, again, it didn't feel toxic. It felt like I was coming alive, coming home, coming into the seat of my soul within my own body, my own sexuality, my own sensuality. Here's the thing I didn't know back then is that eye gazing can actually be a trigger for trauma. So nowadays, I don't suggest that as a first off tool that anybody should use when they're stepping into this community. You also heard me talk about later that weekend stepping into a workshop and meeting the facilitator of that workshop and how she started talking about being a woman, what it meant to be a woman and what it meant to be a man. And she was running a business called Awakening Shakti. With her business, she offered a group coaching program that was reasonable, that was for women to sign up to be able to really step back into their own Shakti energy. And Shakti, if you don't know, is the Sanskrit goddess of power, of life, of force, of creation. It's the counterpart to Shiva in that culture. And it would be like Mother Earth, right? That would be the idea of Shakti. Anyway, so she was hosting this class called Awakening Shakti. It was like a 6-week group coaching session that we did online. So I signed up for that and I dove in all the way, of course, because that's just my personality. I signed up with that group. I signed up to start coaching with her and really diving into exploring that question of what it meant to be a woman. In this process, I was able to give up my rigid ideas of who God was that the Bible had told me who God was. And I kept expanding my idea of who the divine was. It was the universe, it was divine, it was the cosmos. I would use any of those words. And I would have little, coincidences that we would say that are coincidences, serendipity. And I would just say, you can't make this shit up. It is the universe. There is still something powerful out there orchestrating all of this. And I'm just here in the mix of it all. I got exposed to the conscious dance world first at Honey Root. That's the women's embodiment retreat group that I was at. And then later the next year, I was in San Luis Obispo in Central Coast, California, and enjoyed my first ecstatic dance setting where I, by the end of it, felt so blissed out. I felt ecstatic. I felt really turned on. I felt orgasmic, if you will. And I was just so in love with being in my body and in the space and the energy and the movement and the sound and the people. When I got back home from San Luis Obispo, that's when I decided to see if there was an ecstatic dance community in my own neighborhood in Silicon Valley. And there was. Here was what I was naive about, though, in that beginning stage, is because it had the word conscious, I thought that meant everybody was conscious of the shit that I had left the church for and was now conscious of what they were doing in this world and being really intentional. No. It's just a word that people use to sound good. It means that, there's no drinking, no drugs, no alcohol, no talking on the dance floor, so that we can be really intentional with our body in the moment. That's all that meant. But I didn't know that back then because there was no education like I ended up developing for the community later. But now I'm involved in not just the women's embodiment retreat group, I'm also involved in this coaching, I'm also involved in this conscious dance community, and I start to explore more avenues of how I can expand myself, how I can free myself from the things that I feel like are still inhibiting me from living my best life and being able to call in or manifest whatever it is that the universe wants me to do, whatever the divine, whatever God and Goddess wants me to do with my life. It was about this time that I started to hear the word twin flame. Now, if you've seen any of the documentaries, I did not get involved in the twin flame universe or the twin flame school or whatever it was, but I did get highly involved in the ideology of twin flames and soulmates. Also, because I loved the model of life coaching, decided to go back and get my life coaching certification. Now, I'd seen 2 hours that you can do online and start calling yourself a life coach because they give you a little paper certificate. And I said, no. Like, I looked into becoming an MFT as a Christian a lot of times and knew how rigid that was. So I wanted something a little bit more solid than just an online course for 2 hours and a piece of paper, or just calling myself a life coach like a lot of people do. So I decided to go back and take a 21-day intensive course in Marin County at that time with a company called Academy of Leadership Coaching and NLP. Now, I know know there's a lot of different thoughts out there about NLP. I do believe a lot of it is junk science, but there's also a lot of it that's just visualization and helping people to tap into their own inner knowing, because their inner knowing is where all their experiences are. I'm not going to go into that now, but I don't necessarily suggest NLP anymore either. So I've learned a lot. I got my certification, started to build my life coaching business. After about 6 months of building my life coaching business, I was struggling. I had 2 clients and I didn't know where to go from there. That embodiment retreat group world that I've been part of, there'd been some women who were supposedly business life coaches. I didn't know back then that that was just a scam. And I'll talk more about that in season 3. Anyways, I decided to sign up for the business coaching group coaching session with this woman from this group because it was talking about selling from the heart. A lot of times people will do a webinar to call people into their program and into their group. And she had all of us crying by the end of it. Now I know that was a little bit of a narcissistic manipulation tool that she was using, but I didn't know that back then. I thought it was really genuine and from the heart. But she had all of us crying and willing to hand over thousands of dollars to sign up for this coaching course. Again, I'm going to save the specifics for later, just giving you a little overview of my time in this community. And it wasn't just one community, and that's what makes it hard to identify as a cult, but it's all of the toxicity that's built into these communities that we don't see because of patriarchy that I was getting wrapped up in. The other things that I also got wrapped up in were the energy world. I didn't know it at that time that it was simply body language. I did end up getting my body language certificate too in 2019 and quickly realized as I was studying for that that's what energy was. But besides the fact, I was super intrigued by it. Didn't know if I really believed in it, didn't know if I had a gift at it, but all of my mentors I was training with, of course, encouraged me that I had a very unique gift, and they made me feel very special. Again, a little love bombing in order to get me to commit either their money or my time, my energy, and my body to their work. The biggest thing is that none of this, again, felt toxic at the beginning. It felt so magical, so mystical. I mean, it really tapped into those first early experiences I'd had as a Christian where I literally had visions of Jesus in the worship or, knocking on the door. I thought, oh my gosh, that's why my brain used Jesus, even though I was having this mystical experience, because it was the only thing it could relate to, right? It was the only concrete thing that I had been exposed to for the 5 months previous to that to relate this mystical experience. And I learned, oh, well, no, that was just because I have this ability to tap into mysticism much like most of us do. Being out of that world for a couple years now and looking back on it, I can see how those first couple of years, especially those first couple of months in a new community or with a new mentor, was actually a lot of love bombing. Now, I'm not calling all of them narcissist, but I think love bombing is actually pretty common when we're starting a new relationship with anyone. So we have to be really aware of it. Where it turns toxic is what somebody decides to do with that connection once they have it. And that's what we're going to talk about next. We're going to talk about the manipulative tactics repackaged in goddess language, rooted in the same old patriarchal belief that we're broken, that we need fixing, that someone else holds the key. Which brings me to what I now call the 6 false freedoms. The following aren't just red flags or bad apples. They're systemic, different arms of the same machine. Patriarchy. The machine is patriarchy. The software, shame, scarcity, scrutiny, spiritualized control. I could do a whole episode on each one of these, and as I've said, I probably will do that in episode 3, where I'll go into the betrayals, the trauma, the hurt, and the crazy things that were said to me, along with how much money I lost in this world. For now, I want to give you just that 25,000 foot vision. So I'm going to give you just a glimpse into each of these stories. A single moment of revelation where I realized patriarchy just didn't leave because I left the church. It was still there, just as I keep saying, in a different language with a different dress on. It was the same control, the same hierarchy, and the same shame. Here are the 6 freedoms that promise liberation, but just embed me in chains even deeper. Number 1, the life coaching culture. As I mentioned, when I couldn't start my own business, I ended up signing up for this woman's business coaching course that was a 9-month course and invested heavily in it. When I didn't get any of the results, I was the one to be blamed. I was blamed because I wasn't using her verbatim language she wanted me to use in any of my marketing materials. But the real truth is, her course sucked. No one got results. Everybody was leaving, and I was the only one that was stupid enough to pay up front. In her mind, if my business wasn't growing and thriving, it's because I had resistance to her and not doing exactly as she wanted me to do. The message: you don't need community, you don't need support, you just need me, babe, your boss babe. Let me show you how it's done. And by the way, you need to pay me $15,000 to get it done. Some of the other things that come from this world of life coaching is that personal growth becomes performance, where hacking the mind, body, soul, and spirit with the newest trend pushes and pushes you until you are depleted, exhausted, and confused with nothing to show for it. It preaches independence, that you don't need a system. It becomes toxic with codependence on your coach to help you unblock your limiting beliefs for just $10,000 for 10 sessions. This leads to the financial sunk cost fallacy, which is actually a conscious bias that we'll go into in season 3, where you stick it out even if you see it's unhealthy because you don't want to lose the money. This is the world where women are selling women the divine feminine as if a lifestyle brand. Become the goddess and priestess you are meant to be by coming to my weekend retreat, where we're going to get naked, roll around in the mud, and call each other priestesses and connect to our past life where somehow all of us were priestesses, even though the numbers don't work out. Now, by the way, I never did anything like this. There might be shit like this out there. I wouldn't be surprised, but personally, I never got naked and rolled around with women in the mud. At the end of the day, the church told me I was broken. The life coaching world told me I was blocked. The same message, just in different language. I was the one that needed to be fixed. Number 2, law of attraction and manifestation. When I left the church, it would take me years to understand all of the magical thinking that I'd been partaking in order to make the doctrines work in my life. But lo and behold, I was actually still wrapped up in it with law of attraction and just couldn't see it. They use the language and world of science to make you believe that you're actually believing in something scientific when there's nothing scientific about it. I was taught to align, raise my vibration, and visualize checks arriving in the mail. If it didn't happen, it was because my subconscious was sabotaging me. I wasn't grateful enough. I hadn't done the shadow work. In the end, the law of attraction was nothing more than the prosperity gospel in yoga pants. I wasn't sinful now, but I was low vibe. Abundance happens if you rid yourself of your negative thoughts and unconscious patterns. That's where toxic positivity comes in. The doctrine of original sin wrapped up in victim blaming. If you're suffering, it's your vibration, not my method. It's the same logic with new meaning. When prayer didn't work, I thought I wasn't holy enough. When manifestation didn't work, I thought I wasn't high vibe enough. Either way, the shame still landed on me. Can you see the pattern developing here? Number 3, soulmate, twin flames, sacred unions, and polarity culture. I once thought I'd met my twin flame on a dance floor. We had a magical 5 weeks together. He got me to commit to a monogamous relationship with him, and then he ghosted me. I spiraled. I journaled. I got a little obsessive. I wept in women's circles and asked what I was doing wrong. They just said, you're in the divine cycle of the runner and the chaser, and you've got to stop chasing him, but you've got to do it all through you. I mean, oh my God, whatever language they used, I was confused, so I kept at it. See how they can use confusion even to their advantage? Anywho's, I was stuck in a loop of spiritually gaslighting myself. These teachings mask emotional abuse as sacred destiny. They recast trauma bonds as cosmic contracts. People become obsessive, maybe even stalker-like, and they reframe that as destiny. Emotional abuse gets cloaked as divine purpose. Narcissistic abuse is framed as runner-chaser dynamics. The polarity world wants you to go back to how females and feminism has ruined everything because they don't support their man, and that this is what women are meant to be and this is what men are meant to be. And it looks a lot like the Christian dynamics, y'all. In the end, twin flame theory is not sacred union. It's purity culture reformulated as polarity culture. It's trauma bonding with spiritual hashtags. 4, the conscious dance community, ecstatic dance, 5 rhythms, soul motion, open floor, and any of the other ones out there. beware. I shared my first experiences of what it was like to be on a conscious freeform movement dance floor and how magical it was. But it didn't take me long to find out that it wasn't conscious. I mentioned that in the intro. And I also found out that most of the men were pretty shady and pretty shitty, and a lot of them were narcissists. A lot of these men were the ones leading and are still leading the communities. Now, when any violation towards women would happen, a lot of times women would just put it under, they would stuff it down, talk about it amongst themselves, but not go to the facilitator, because guess what? It was usually the man facilitating that might have been in violation. And if they did go to the facilitator because he wasn't the man, a lot of times spiritual bypassing would happen, and it would be framed as, oh, you're just projecting your daddy issues onto him, or your last toxic relationship onto him, or you're not being open enough to receiving the gift and the medicine that he's bringing into your life. It's really this mind gymnastics that they have you do in order to believe that, on a higher plane, there are no violations. It's all of how you perceive it. And that's how they get away with stuff. These spaces preach consent and presence, but the men who lead them are often protected by performance, spiritual jargon, and an immense sense of entitlement and spiritual bypassing, all supported by patriarchy. The illusion of safety in non-hierarchical spaces is just that. It's an illusion. Most of these communities, as I mentioned, are still run by men, and men who haven't been trained in how to hold sacred space and have consent and not have their own consent violations. And they also don't understand how to stay out of the teacher-student dynamic, which is something I learned a lot about and could go off on it, but I'm not going to do that here in this episode. You can see some of my older work where I do go into that. They're teaching conscious consent and nonviolent communication out front, but behind closed door, y'all, these people are not practicing what they're preaching, or they're doing, again, that mind gymnastic, spiritual bypassing BS in order to make themselves look like they are. It's a lot of narcissistic traits in there. Women are groomed to stay silent, all in the name of flow and peace and presence, so that they can be evolved and they're true feminine and have a safe landing space for the masculine. Accountability, which is never said out loud, is seen as actually low vibration or just projection. Back in 2015 and 16, I started to see the writing on the wall and developed my own version of ecstatic dance called movement medicine. And I tried to take it out into the masses. I was in the heart of where a lot of this dance was happening, and nobody wanted to do it. Fast forward 10 years later, this year, when I was back out in California putting this series together, all of these violations, legal violations of the people that have crafted, created, and are leading these spaces are coming forward into the zeitgeist now, and people are still writing it off as spiritual bypassing. They're still writing it off as, oh, that's the female. They're turning it into the female being the perpetrator instead of really holding these men accountable for their actions. That is the saddest thing to me, is that this beautiful space where people could really find healing is still being traumatized to this day. Just wait for that Netflix documentary, because I'm sure it's going to happen. Number 5, women's empowerment circles. So I mentioned, if we go back to my stories that I've already shared here, that I met this business coach in a women's empowerment circle. And I met her actually probably that first weekend that I was there, that first year, at least the second year I went back. When I approached the woman that held the space, that had created Honey Root itself, and told her about the violations that were happening in the community because of this woman, and I wasn't the only one that had experienced violations. I was the only one willing to come forward and be the whistleblower. You know what she said to me? I can still remember the tone of her voice. I'm okay still letting her be part of the community and be a leader and be a teacher and let her advertise her business through us. I'm still okay with that. What the fuck, man? I couldn't believe it. I still get so fired up about that. Sisterhood, it turns out, is just as silencing as patriarchy, because again, we've internalized a lot of this power dynamic without doing the work as we step out of the indoctrination of either the church or the culture at large and into these sacred spaces. We're bringing all of that in with us. I mean, this doesn't even take into account all the narcissism that's in the world. That's a whole nother story we're not going to get into today. In sisterhood, empowerment becomes a product, a commodity. It's something that you can sell other people so that you can reach reach your desired dreams of being a 6 or 7 figure business owner. It still suppresses dissent in favor of ego and power. And there's still a lot of emotional and spiritual bypassing happening in favor of holding spaces while ignoring abuse, as you just heard me say in my story. If your sisterhood shames grief, suppresses anger and dissent, and protects the women in power, just like we see when it's the men in power, that's not sisterhood, y'all. That's a sorority of silence, still playing on the stage of patriarchy. And number 6, last but not least, and I'm sure there's more of these out there in the self-help world, MLMs that are really nothing more than pyramid schemes. I joined an MLM during 2020. We all know what was happening during 2020. We couldn't go out, so I got recruited into an MLM. I had no idea it was an MLM for the first 6 months because they hid it really well. I was told that I could turn my pain into a mission and become financially free by simply recruiting other people into the program and selling not products, but love. I sold life insurance, y'all, which actually I am pretty passionate about. And I do believe it's a love product, but that's a whole nother story. When I was having a lot of success, they pushed me and they pushed me and they pushed me to go further, faster, without rest. But I still had to work and find a way to provide for myself on top of working this business that wasn't generating money, or not enough money yet. And I was burnt out. I was exhausted. I needed some space and time. And when I said, no, I'm not going to show up for this, woo, did all of the narcissistic manipulation, mind game, control tactics start to happen. And that veil came off really fast. And that's when I realized that I was not in what I thought I was in. I started to do research because that's what I do, and found out it was an MLM. And I found out how much of a scam these things really are. And that's, again, a story for another time. MLMs tend to make money sharing your story by commodifying trauma. They create sacred sales funnels built on financial desperation, recruiting financial desperation. They never go after anybody that's financially stable that just wants a little extra money. It's all of us that are trying to figure out how to keep our heads afloat that they usually recruit. They blend spirituality with capitalism until women burn out trying to be their own brand. If your spiritual path looks like an org chart, you're probably in an MLM scam. The longer I was in all of these spaces, the more I started to feel that old tension again. That sinking suspension that no matter how many layers I peeled back, the shame, the pressure, the never enoughness, it was all still there, just dressed up in linen and crystals. All of these surface level systems were pointing to something deeper. The reason so many of us fall for them, the reason they feel true at first, it's not because we're broken, it's because we've been conditioned by patriarchy to believe we're broken. They aren't isolated systems. They're a web, a matrix, if you will. Different costumes, same playbook. It all goes back to the core wound patriarchy establishes itself into our cultural and individual psyche with. Because you experience chaos in the world, this is the result from being broken. A sinner, wounded, incomplete, not whole. If you had my system, my God, my formula, my chant, my magic potion, then you too can make the chaos not chaos. You can calm the storm and have a perfect life. All these places had different names: coaching, consciousness, dance, sisterhood. But the message was the same. You're not whole, you're broken. Your trauma is still blocking you, holding you back, keeping you down. Someone else has the solution. It'll cost you, but isn't it worth telling the universe that you are worth as much as you're gonna invest in yourself through my program? If you're not willing to do that, then the universe isn't going to benefit you. The universe isn't going to prosper you and give you what you deserve. See that language there? What I eventually realized was that these weren't separate systems. They were tentacles of the same beast. A system that profits off women staying stuck in their self-doubt, always trying to become enough, but never quite getting there. These aren't isolated systems, as I've said. They're a web, they're a matrix. Different costumes, same playbook, and the good news is, once you've seen the pattern, you can step off the stage. These aren't individual stories of getting duped or disillusioned. They're part of a much bigger unraveling, one that's happening right now. Because while many of us are waking up to these hidden systems, patriarchy isn't going quietly. It's doubling down with things like Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation, and the current administration. Doubling down in spiritual communities with polarity culture in place of purity culture and in empowerment spaces alike. Whether you were in the Christian world that I was in or not, or you just ended up in the overpromised, underdelivered, help thyself world, either way, it's not because you are broken. It's not because you're needing a savior. And it's not because you need to dig deep into every crevice of your unconscious mind in order to eradicate all of these different patterns that are limiting your ability to have a good life. It's none of that. As I keep saying, it's the system that's broken. And that brokenness is showing itself so much right now. That's the hope I want you to take away from this season, if nothing else. That the system is giving its last-ditch effort because it knows it's broken and it can't keep going on like this forever. It's broken beyond repair. It's the patriarchal dominator system that needs to be questioned, deconstructed, and highly evaluated. We are seeing the downfall of this system today, the rapid decline of a system that cannot and does not work for us. Even as patriarchy seems to be holding on faster, harder, I and many that are able to see from this wider angle lens I keep talking about see that patriarchy is making one last-ditch effort to claim its lost throne. Rain Eisler mentions this in her groundbreaking book, The Chalice and the Blade, published in 1988, and she confirms it with this quote: "Given our present high level of technological development, a dominator model of social organization is maladaptive. Because this dominator model now seems to be reaching its logical limits, many men and women are today rejecting long-standing principles of social organization, including their stereotypical sexual roles. For many others, these changes are only signs of systems breakdown, chaotic disruptions that at all costs must be quelled. The chapters that follow show that our mounting global problems are in large part the logical consequences of a dominator, i.e. patriarchy, model of social organization." Says it all right there. And that was in 1988, y'all. In our final episode for this season, we'll discuss how to use this wider angle lens to rewrite the narratives that shaped our lives and build something new. To not just ingest this education we've had for the past 5 months now, but to actually digest it so that we can transform our lives, rippling out from us to others. If you're ready to transform this education into action, to reimagine and rewrite what life could look like beyond the systems, thoughts, and stories of patriarchy, be sure to join us next time for What Can We Do Now? Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that systems can't heal us, but truth can free us. And that truth starts with what Gerda Lerner encourages us to do in the end of her first book, The Creation of Patriarchy, our Bible for this work. If you've been watching all season, you already know the answer because I say it multiple times per episode. Either way, join us next time for that answer. If you made it this far, thank you so much. I know these were 2 deep episodes sharing my personal story. I could go into so much more depth, and as I keep saying, I will with season 3 when we go into more of the toxic self-help world and everything that I experienced there. Anywho, leave me a comment. Leave me a comment of just me too. Did you experience any of this within the church or the self-help world? Share this with somebody that needs to hear that they are maybe potentially in something that's not healthy, that's toxic. And make sure that if you are not subscribed to this channel, that you are subscribed so you don't miss any episodes. We have a lot planned for the summer that's going to be more fun, a little bit lighthearted, hopefully, than this heavy first season. And if you have not binged season 1 yet, what are you waiting for? Go back to the beginning with that first trailer where I say, is everyone normal but me? One of the questions that started my own personal journey, that started this journey of deconstructing patriarchy together here on this channel. All right, so much love. Till next time, toodaloo, ciao, ciao, bye-bye, adios.